Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Darren.
Hello.
You know, I like to start each episode by asking you guys if you've listened to anything interesting lately.
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of Phil Nyblock, I think it's pronounced. You ever heard of him, Gabe?
No.
He's like super minimalist composer. It's just like held tone, like 2 or 3 tones just going for a really long amount of time. And it's really cool.
Sounds fun.
Yeah.
What about you, Darren?
Besides what we're talking about today, actually, somebody asked me to listen to this girl named Billie Eilish. Is that
I've heard a lot about this person.
Yeah, I felt like I was probably late to the game with this, but yeah, she's kind of like, I guess, the lord of this.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
that's what I thought.
Yeah, it was kind of instant the moment I started listening to it. But I mean, she's not bad, but like I listened to the entire album and it was pretty much boring besides like the 2 main singles. So
yeah, I thought it was a little weird.
It's weird because I was looking that album up today on Rate Your Music because I keep hearing a lot about it, but she's like 17, and I just feel like there's nothing a 17-year-old's got to offer me,
Yeah, I don't think you're missing out on much, Dan.
Good.
Yeah, I strongly suspect that it's crap. But I have been listening to, we talked about this, Dan, Boobs of Doom. I know it's the worst name ever.
It's the worst name
ever.
I just can't take it seriously.
But it's like this, weird, it's kind of like, I don't know, mezzanine era, like trip hop-ish, kind of like dark trip hop or something. Massive Attack, of course, but mixed with like sun or earth kind of like droning and just blown out distortion. It's cool, but the fun part is that they're releasing an album every month this year. So they're up to 4 starting today. And that's 4 hours of just, punishing kind of trip hop drone. I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's really rad. I've been listening to it too.
Yeah, love it. But let's jump into today's topic because we got a hell of a lot to get to. A while ago, we did an episode on the 10th anniversary of Animal Collective's Merriweather Post Pavilion, an album that, love it or hate it, seems guaranteed to stick around in the popular consciousness. But then it occurred to us that a ton of fascinating, if slightly less memorable albums will be turning 10 this year too, and we think they deserve a little retrospective celebration as well. So we decided to revisit all of our favorite records from 2009 and compare our personal top 5 lists. But we also want to discuss the musical landscape of that year in general, what trends survived and informed the next decade, and which ones quickly faded into obscurity. We plan on finding out. I don't want to spoil any of our picks, which we haven't shared with each other yet. I'm actually very excited to hear. So even though it feels a little anticlimactic, before we get into that bigger 2009 conversation, we should just go ahead and go over our list. Dan, what was your number 5 record of 2009?
Yeah, my number 5 record, Black Moth Super Rainbow with Eating Us. It's a band. They're not super big or anything, but it's like this weird electronic, like sort of bubblegummy synth. They get compared to like Boards of Canada a lot, but I don't super like that comparison. But then the singer always sings through a vocoder, so it's like this weird sort of like alien, it's slightly scary feel to it over these like what would normally be sort of bubblegummy and sweet sounding. So I've just always really liked them, and this album, it's basically the last album they released that was good. Everything after that, just they really kind of fell into being like a one-trick pony kind of band. But this is a record I've loved since it came out, and I still like it. Either you guys got that one on your list?
I don't, and in fact, it's not on my radar at all. I've never really listened to it, but is that the same guy as like Tobacco?
Yeah. He's the like leader of Black Moth Super Rainbow, but he's essentially the only person in both of them.
Okay, I gotta say I was mildly intrigued. Didn't like the lyrics that much, but this Malibu Ken album from this year, have you checked that out?
I didn't listen to it because, like I said, the last 2 Black Moth records and 1 EP were just basically garbage. And then Tobacco's had a couple solo releases since then, and just pretty garbage too. So I didn't check that one out, but I have actually heard good things about it, so I think I should.
Yeah, I thought the beat making, which we should clarify is by this Tobacco guy, was really very, very interesting, and maybe gives me a little portal into maybe the sound of that record, even though it was 10 years ago. Okay, Darren, what is your number 5 record?
Wait, don't I get to talk about Black Moth Super Rainbow for a second?
Sure.
They opened for Animal Collective, right?
No, that's Black Dice. God.
Okay, so I will say though, although I haven't heard this record, I have listened to their previous record, I guess. I think it's
Dandelion Gum?
Yeah. That's the only one I'm really familiar with.
That's their best one.
Them. Okay, well good. That's the one I know. Don't know this one.
There you
go.
And enjoy? Just know, or know and enjoy?
Mostly just know. I don't really remember it. Yeah. Like, it's in my collection. It's one of those. I didn't delete it. That's a good thing, right? You know?
Yeah, that always works.
All right. Then what is your number 5, Darren?
Yes. Number 5 for me is Leroux's album, Leroux.
Okay.
All right.
How come?
Pop music actually had a pretty big year, I'd say, in 2009. I think we might talk about this later on in the honorable mentions, maybe. But Leroux really stood out for me that year, and it went beyond just like a single song or even 2 songs. This album, I was obviously listening to it quite a bit. Really took me back to that year in terms of like the sound and everything. But I was sort of pleasantly surprised, just how much of the record I recalled, and how much of the record actually was worth listening to. A lot of pop records kind of die off after like the first couple of songs or whatever, This one holds together fairly well. I mean, I like a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about on this list, they're not like all-time favorites, you know what I mean? They wouldn't really, I doubt this would ever make an all-time great list of mine, but it was my favorite, of the, I guess female pop singer records of that year.
Yeah, this was one that I really, really loved that year. I think it's a topic that we'll want to return to again and again. But, I was struggling all week as we were kind of compiling these lists to figure out, was pop like really good, exceedingly good in 2009, or what was going on, or if we just like sort of lost touch with the youth music or something. But I just remember, hearing actually that Bulletproof song on the radio of all places. And I think I was literally driving in a car and my, something like my aux cord wasn't working or something. It's literally the only reason I had the radio on. And I just heard this song and I like had to go home and download it immediately. And it was just, it's just like electro pop bliss. And it's very indie, right? It's like, do you think of it as like a mainstream pop record or an indie-tronica record?
More like an indie-tronica, kind of in the vein of like a Robin sort of thing, what I mean? Not so definitely not like your Katy Perry's of the world at all. It's weird. It's strange how that Bulletproof ended up being such a massive single. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I can't remember. Like, did Pitchfork really love this record?
I don't think they reviewed it or anything.
They didn't even touch it, did they?
No,
I think they did. This is the kind of thing we should look up before we go on air. But while I look that up, that was a record I was excited to like revisit when we decided to do this 2009 thing. Because I like really loved that. I really fell in love with that record when it first came out and everything. But I'll say it didn't make my list. It's one of those things that like in the time, and maybe it was because I was younger, I would hear Bulletproof at the club and stuff. But it just doesn't hold up as well. I feel like any enjoyment I got from listening to the record was sort of nostalgia based more than anything else.
It sounds dated. I think it does.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds dated, but it also was kind of originally going for that maybe like 80s throwback synth pop kind of vibe, which gives it a little bit more like lasting power. It's not just 2009 in a nutshell. It's got this kind of like lineage, which I think is really fun and really interesting. And I did re-listen to it this week. Didn't quite make my list, but it's certainly fun. And this is something I want to keep coming back to. Like I said, did it just feels like indie and pop were becoming much harder to distinguish around this time. But we'll definitely return to that.
But
my number 5, yeah.
Pitchfork did review it, and they gave it a 7.
Okay, so not on the ball yet. That's also something I want to talk about, which Pitchfork has yet at this point, the last year where they were not what I would consider like a full poptimist publication. So maybe if this came out like a year or two later, it would have gotten a better score. My number 5, The Field, Yesterday and Today. Either of you guys familiar with The Field?
I am, and I forgot that record came out in 2000. I knew this was going to happen. I was going to forget some records. But yeah, I haven't listened to that in forever. But yeah, I like The Field.
I can't say I've ever listened to it.
Yeah, well, his first album was the big hit. It's called From Here We Go Sublime. It came out in 2007. On one hand, it's maybe like a little bit of Pitchfork tokenism, how they just randomly pick like an electronic artist to hype up for some reason. But on the other hand, it actually is very accessible and melodic, kind of minimal techno with like this shoegazy kind of dream pop feel to it. It's a fascinating sound, and this is their second album, their sophomore album, which was kind of divisive, like didn't get as much acclaim. It was kind of seen, I reread Pitchfork's article as like a little bit like half moving forward and half kind of retreading the same ground, which is interesting because he seems to be aware of this, naming the album Yesterday and Today. But in my opinion, it's kind of like the first album has this sort of charming amateurism to it, and this one he's really becoming like an expert in soundcraft. It's got this like, it's kind of gas style ambient techno, but like a little bit more upbeat. It's all seems to be comprised of like little snippets of sampled sound, maybe in an oval kind of way. But it's got that like glistening shoegaze, swells. It's got this like krautrock kind of chug. And on this album, it's only 6 tracks long, and they're all longer than basically anything on the first album. He's like really stretching out, and most importantly, he's incorporating live instruments. It's like they're actually jamming to these like minimal techno vibes. It's like, especially the live drums, I think add so much. So, in my opinion, it just, even Field fans don't love this album that much. And I was honestly surprised to find that listening back, I love it just as much as the rest of his work, which I'm a huge fan of. And something like the last track, which is called Sequenced, is 16 minutes long. And it kind of like looks forward to the sort of darker, like Steve Reich style minimalism that I think he's getting into in his more recent work. But do you guys have any memory of the? Doesn't it? I mean, was it a little earlier or what? But it seems like electronica was also kind of colliding with indie in a big way. We talked about indie-tronica of Leroux, for example, but within a few years, guitars will be completely dead. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely sort of the beginning of that. Things like Leroux, and I mean, even my number 5 pick, Black Moth. It was that like sort of the like real beginning of the like melding of indie rock and electronic music.
Yeah, I would probably say my entire list is very much in line with this like mending of electronic music and indie rock.
It was absolutely peaking at that time, and it's just amazing to think that like this would be the last year we would hear guitars basically. I think back to like, it was a few years earlier, but the Knife's Silent Shout, 2006. It Pitchfork gave it Album of the Year, and I remember it causing extreme outrage because it was like, what, an electronic album,
Yeah, you didn't like that, if I recall.
I was pissed. I don't remember what I liked more. I think Liars or something like that. But I was like, what? Like a token, electronic artist. Pitchfork doesn't know anything about electronic music anyway. They just pick one artist. I was actually right about that even way back then. But it is a good album. But it's interesting just by 2009. I mean, there was nothing weird really about an electronic album being
it really moved fast.
I know. I mean, it just flooded things, and I think it's a different beast from like the 90s when IDM was really big. But Well, we'll talk more about that. How about your number 4, Dan?
Yeah, my number 4, speaking of records that, aren't as loved by the fans of that band, my number 4 is Clipse, Till the Casket Drops. For some reason, this album gets, I feel, unfairly maligned. It's the first record they did that's not 100% produced by the Neptunes. It's still like 98% produced by them. But, I think people complain that it's a little too pop or whatever, but I like it. It's definitely probably their third worst record, but it's still great. Just full of bangers. I'm a big Pusha T fan, and this is the last we hear from Clipse until Malice goes Christian and everything. So it's got like an interesting story behind it, and it's got a really nice Kanye feature. You can't ever go wrong with that. I don't get why this record. I think this is a record that people need to look back on. It's something that, like, coming off of Hell Hath No Fury, the expectations were just super high, and it was one of those situations kind of where almost anything they did was not going to live up to it, and so I feel like because of that it got an unfair shake, and so I think people could go with looking back at it now, with time passed, and appreciate it much more.
Yeah, that's not. I've honestly never listened to it.
Oh, really?
Huge fan of Hell Hath No Fury, which I'm seeing now was also 2006. I think that's better than The Knife's Silent Shout. Maybe in 2026.
I'll stop you there.
In 2026, we can do like a 20-year anniversary of all the, we'll count down these records. But, I do love Clipse, and I just sort of assumed, because it got such bad reviews, that maybe the Neptunes weren't handling most of it, but it kind of looks like they are. Darren, any kind of a Clipse fan in you?
No, not really. I mean, I like Pusha T quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I've always been meaning to come back to like a record like this or Hell Hath No Fury, but I just never have.
You're missing out.
Dan, does it sound like, I know it's the Neptunes, but does it sound like super 2009 hip hop?
Yeah, a little bit. But you know what? That's one thing. The Hell Hath No Fury and Lord Willing. Those are classic records. Don't at me. But there's moments on it where you're like, this came out in the early 2000s, and I can tell. Yeah. And, Pharrell's got that sound, and we all know what it sounds like. And I feel like this record doesn't have that Pharrell sound as much. But, it definitely does. There's some songs that you can tell. Like, remember, like, this is sort of like... I can't remember if it's in the middle of or towards the end of like the Ringtone Rap kind of thing.
Yes.
And there's a couple moments that, you feel a little ringtone rapish, but it never like divulges, completely into that or anything. But it feels there's some references that are quite a bit dated. He makes like some Lady Gaga, quips and stuff.
Yeah.
But rap always kind of suffers from that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm more worried about the sound, but sometimes I think this is something we could touch on more moving forward also. But sometimes it's like you revisit these older records and it's interesting to see how they were like kind of looking ahead to all the stuff that was going to happen. But sometimes it's also equally fun to see that they like really are just part of their time or something.
Yeah. And see, this record is part of its time. It's not like, we're seeing what Pusha would become, or, it's nothing like that. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's just fun.
That can be perfectly cool. Darren, how about your number 4?
My number 4 was Discovery's LP.
Okay.
Yes, another indie meets electronic, probably way more electronic on this record. Dan, have you heard this record?
No, I don't think I even know what that is.
So it's the like a recording project of one of the guys who used to be in Vampire Weekend, and then I guess the other guy was like in Rah Rah Riot. I don't know if you've heard of that band, but basically those two indie bands, 2 of their members came together and put this little like electronic project together. And I kind of picked it because it like really reminded me of 2009, quite a bit. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not really a record that I had ever really come back to since then. So it was, I'll admit it wasn't like the most enjoyable listen, like coming back to it. Like the first time it was like, okay, this is cool. I remember this album. And then repeated listens, I was kind of like, Yep, this is 2009 that we're in here. You know what I mean? The record has a couple of really strong tracks early on. I'd say it was a pretty like, top heavy record. As it like goes on, you kind of like it's sort of like a one trick pony. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's only 30 minutes. You know, so it's
right. So it's that was my other point. It was like it's really quick though. Like you kind of get through it. It's not it's not impossible to like get to the end of the album. You know what I mean? It's
like a sugar rush to me, and it's kind of like a disposable quality. You know, like one of the 10 tracks is kind of like a indie electronic cover of Jackson 5's "I Want You Back," you know, which I think is really fun how they do it though. But in a sense, that disposable quality is what makes it fun. You know, it's almost like it's weird to think actually, because we're talking about like electronic music, like kind of meeting indie, and the whole presentation of this project feels kind of like, well, of course we wouldn't, use so many drum machines and synths on like our real records, but this is for fun, and like pretty soon it won't have to be for fun anymore. Just like with the Field I was just talking about, like it won't have to be a novelty anymore. It's just going to be like the thing. But I do think this is an incredibly charming and fun album. That's another thing I want to ask you. Maybe you can answer, Dan. Do you feel like, like music was just more fun in 2009? This is something I kept thinking about this whole time.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I want to say yes, but it might just be because like it seemed like kind of dancey things were big, and that's intrinsically kind of fun sounding. But yeah, I guess maybe. I mean, it was a better time. Different president and stuff.
Different president.
Yeah, Obama just got elected. It was
yeah. I mean, well, we were all around the same age. Obviously, like. This was the time where we were going to clubs, like indie clubs and stuff. So a lot of the picks that I've got here, I remember, I remember specifically hearing the songs in the club. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And see, like I haven't gone to a club in years and years. So maybe music is
maybe.
Yeah, I mean maybe music's still just as fun, but I'm not hearing the fun. And when you do hear like those kind of club bangers. Just at home, it doesn't have the same feel to it. So maybe music still is fun. Probably not.
yeah, that might be true. But that's something I want to return to later on as well. My number 4. I just learned how to pronounce this today. Let me see. Grizzly Bear Vekatimist.
I've always wondered how to say that.
I literally never knew. I think it's such a fascinating album for 2009 because, 2 weeks. You guys remember the song 2 Weeks, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, not off the top of my head.
If you heard it, you would know it. But it's like absolute indie banger. I mean, it's just so catchy. It's like one of these masterpieces of indie crossing over into the world of pop. And I remember at the time, comparing it in my head to Animal Collective's My Girls, and just thinking, like something different is happening. These are like catchier than anything on the radio, and they would be huge hits if just the whole world heard them. It's just that they don't know. And then it turns out that 2 weeks was like complete misdirection because this album is weird. Like 2 weeks is the only perfectly crafted pop song. The rest are more like, I would compare them to post rock. It's like the same palette as Do Make Say Think. This kind of like rustic tonal palette, like slightly jazzy, lots of woodwind instruments, strummed acoustic guitars. There's like, it's really slow and meandering, just like wandering through different, it's like each song could be like 5 different songs. It's like the tempo constantly changes and builds up and breaks down. And then it'll occasionally just burst into this like jaw-dropping, these harmonies, these Beach Boys type harmonies, like this pure chamber pop. It's actually kind of similar to Fleet Fox's last album, which I really loved. And it's funny because back in 2009, I always thought of Grizzly Bear as like the thinking man's Fleet Foxes, the Fleet Foxes you couldn't hear at Starbucks, basically. And so it's a really weird album because there's, a lot of people describe it as sort of like boring and meandering, but listening back to it, it's like really fun to search around through. Do you have any memories of this album, Darren?
Yeah, I do, because I'm a really big fan of their previous record, Yellow House.
Yeah.
And I remember even in 2009 trying to get into this album and just couldn't do it. And, obviously 2 weeks was what you would think would be the gateway to the record. But like you just mentioned, it's pretty misleading. Coming back, I came back to this record as well and thinking that this should go on my list. But I couldn't get it there because, I just could not connect to this record even now.
Yeah. And like another thing is like, do you guys remember, like, Dan, do you remember having the feeling that in 2009 that indie was gonna like reach critical mass? Like it was gonna cross over any minute now?
Yeah. I mean, it did feel like that. Yeah.
And, in some ways, maybe like Animal Collective's My Girls kind of did that or something. But I think about, by the next year, Arcade Fire's The Suburbs will win Album of the Year at the Grammys.
Yep, I remember watching that live in your living room.
So that's almost like the moment. Like when we look back at history, like that'll be the moment that indie and mainstream finally collided for good, and they were indistinguishable forevermore. And it's interesting that this moment seemed to be, it was like occurring to all these bands. They were like, we got to go for it. We got to take it. It's happening. And Grizzly Bear, they do it with 2 weeks, and then they like completely shy away from it. I think about all these like famous moments in musical history where underground bands are like primed to break through. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they do it. You think about like an REM or something, they're like, hell yeah, we can write like a radio hit song, and then we're gonna like dominate, or like Smashing Pumpkins, it's like, let's make a double album that's just gonna have like 6 number 1 singles on it. But then you think about something like Pavement, and like when their moment came, they were like, here's Wowie Zowie, like fuck you. We don't want you guys listening. And I think that's basically what Grizzly Bear did here. But it's, what I'm saying, Darren, it's weird because 2 weeks like gives you that, but then they really pull the rug out from under you.
Right, because like I think back to like Yellow House, and there's not really a 2 weeks on Yellow House. You know what I mean?
Right.
I guess that's
maybe
on Knife was like was like the big hit, but 2 weeks almost sounds like a different band to me. It was almost jarring, but yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm fascinated that you like really love this. Did you love this record back then too?
I did. I listened to it so much, and I do believe now that if you listen to it enough, every little weird meandering part you'll just find yourself singing along to. I think it's like one of those things that's worth returning to because there's so many like weird nooks and crannies, almost like a double album. You know how I love double albums.
Right.
But, I just wonder if Grizzly Bear, like they're watching Arcade Fire up on the Grammy stage and thinking like, fuck, if we had written like 10 versions of 2 weeks, maybe we would have been up, that would have been us up there, but
very well could have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So number 3, Dan, what's your number 3?
Yeah, my number 3 is Fever Ray with their self-titled debut record. It's Karen, I think it's Dreiger, whatever.
Right.
From
Speaking of the Knife.
Yep. Yeah, doing a lot of Knife talk tonight. I absolutely love the Knife. Silent Shout for the record deserves Album of the Year 2006.
Wow.
And and this record, it's essentially the Knife light.
Okay.
Which works in its benefit in the fact that the Knife is great, but it sort of works as a little bit of a detriment in that it's just the Knife light. But you've got right off the get-go, If I Had a Heart is like an absolute banger. If it wasn't so weird, like with the vocals and stuff, I think that that could have been sort of like one of these hits we talk about.
And it's purely electronic, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. So it's taking sort of these like indie-tronica things that we've been talking about, but it's skewing it through that weird bubble, that the Knife does. A lot of times, like the instruments are weirdly cheesy. The Knife and this record uses a lot of like that steel drum kind of stuff. It sounds like
right.
Fucking Little Mermaid soundtrack or something. But it's like, but I love that kind of stuff. It's making these like weird, dark songs, but then using this instrument that most people know from the Little Mermaid. It's this weird like dichotomy, and I returned to this record throughout the year, I don't think there's been a year since 2009. I haven't listened to this record at least a couple times. It's just great. But it is something usually I come to it because I listen to all the Knife records and then I want more.
Okay. And you like it a lot better than the other Fever Ray album?
Plunge, the newer one. Yeah, I think I listened to this one more than Plunge. I was trying to think of the last time I listened to Plunge. So I think I do prefer this one.
Yeah, I never really listened to this. Although I do remember one time being at a bar and this was playing, and I was like, asking somebody sitting near me, like, this is a really good song. What is this? And they told me it's from Fever Ray's, first album. And I was like, I should check that out. So maybe I would like it if I listen to it. But I kind of think, like, now that I'm thinking back, maybe I was still so outraged about Silent Shout getting album of the year that I refused to listen to this. It actually wasn't until a little later that I like finally went back and was like, damn, Silent Shout is like really good. But I don't think I ever got around to this, though I did listen to the more recent one a lot. What about you, Darren? I don't imagine you were a big Fever Ray fan in 2009.
No, definitely not, unfortunately. Haven't really listened to any Fever Ray. I've listened to The Knife a little bit, but can't say that I'm a big fan. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, I like that you say you haven't listened to a lot of Fever Ray, but we reviewed that record on our previous podcast.
We did.
Must have really stuck with you.
Yeah, I did. Oh, yeah. The name did sound familiar. Maybe that's where it's coming from.
There you go. Okay.
That's where it's coming from.
Well, no, a lot of electronic, a lot of like indie-tronica going on here, but no crossover on any of our lists, which I find very interesting. It's actually going to take us. It's going to take us like 3 hours to get through our list if we have no crossover whatsoever. Darren, what is your number 3?
All right, my number 3 is Julian Casablancas with Phrases for the Young.
I cannot believe it.
Do you
cannot
remember
believe
this
it.
record?
I love this record.
Yes.
It really almost made my list. I thought I was the only one on earth who liked it.
Yeah, I actually loved it in 2009. Like, absolutely loved it. Yes, and
I'm so happy.
It was a great discovery because I kind of, I did reach out to you guys. Full disclosure, I reached out to you guys because I was struggling with this 2009 stuff, right? And when you encouraged me to start looking at like Last FM, Dan, I found that I had been listening to this album, and I was like, oh shit, I completely forgot that this even existed.
You're welcome.
So, so going back to it was really cool. So this is the front man of The Strokes, Dan, if you weren't familiar.
I know who he is.
Okay. His solo album, I think this is just his one and only like completely solo record, right, Gabe? Is that true?
Yeah, because he's got like the voids now and stuff. So
yeah, but yeah, I mean this album just rocks. It's 8 songs long. The tracks are a bit longer, 4 or 5 minutes, I guess, but it just rocks all the way through,
But it's a little. It's got that like electro pop thing going on.
A little bit, yeah. Again, this has kind of been the theme of my list so far. This one, though, I think leans a little more into the indie rock still. Still a lot of guitars, and stuff on this.
But
this record.
It always makes me think of this. You remember the Strokes song 1251 that had like I don't even know what it's got like a synth on it, and that was like the first single after their big breakthrough first album, comes off their second album. And it was a little jarring at that time to hear them like using synth tones and stuff. And then by the time we get to this album, he like sounds so natural in that world. I love it as well. And I think that, I don't know, it's like, he's so frustrating as a person. You know what I mean, Darren? Because it's like, he's so fucking good and the Strokes are so good. And it's like, you wish they were better, and in fact, it's like almost like they have only 2 good albums. But then I think this could stand alongside, maybe not their first album, but this is like worthy of checking out even now, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like this is probably one of the records, maybe one of 2 records on this list of mine that I feel like doesn't feel extremely dated. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was enjoying listening to it, and I think I'll try to keep it in the rotation here for the next few weeks. But yeah, like I just think that it's fun. It's got a lot of Strokes vibes to it. Obviously, I mean, it wouldn't be a huge mistake to actually think of this as a Strokes record, I think. But it works. I like it.
All right. Well, my number 3 is The Dream with Love versus Money. I don't suppose you guys listened to this back then, but we did on our previous podcast review the Dream's first album.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You guys remember that?
I do.
Yeah. I listened to this one again in the lead up to this.
Wow. Yeah.
To this list, but
well, I mean, I think it's got such an incredible sound. You mentioned ringtone rap earlier, Dan, and this is like really rooted in ringtone rap of the mid 2000s, but it's elevating it to like Prince levels of creativity in my opinion. You know, it's like, you know, think Laffy Taffy, but if, you know, Prince was arranging that song or something. You know, it's also got like the songcraft quality of like R. Kelly, and as far as R&B goes. And in fact, as a side note, I've always thought that, you know, now that R. Kelly's been canceled, we should all just...
Yeah, I was going to say, should we be talking about R. Kelly right now?
Well, we should all just switch over to The Dream, because he's honestly better, in my opinion. And, you know, he does have a little bit of domestic abuse stuff, okay, but it's not as bad as what R. Kelly was up to. So I think we should all just, you know, just replace Ignition with, you know, Walking on the Moon off this album. But and also I wanted to mention, as far as while we're on the topic of R. Kelly, there's an amazing song on this album about having sex to R. Kelly's album 12 Play, where it's like he's having sex with her for so long that it's like 24 play, 36 play, 48 play. You know, it's genius. But basically, this album, you know, it's like the guy who wrote Rihanna's Umbrella, he wrote Justin Bieber's Baby, Beyonce's Single Ladies, and like a million other things. I think he's contributed to basically every Kanye album of the last decade. It's basically him cramming as many hooks as he can into every song. There's like 3 choruses on every track that would be a hit on their own. And, you know, by virtue of this, it's basically like better in every way than his previous album, in my opinion, because it's just like more complex, more sophisticated, but it's also kind of just denser sound wise and quite a bit darker. And then lyrically, you know, it's a great time. If you can't tell from the R. Kelly 12 Play thing, it's funny. He's like a braggadocious asshole, but he's also kind of sensitive. And I find it sort of moving in a weird way, this whole album. I can't figure it out. So this is another example of that. Like, it's a dated sound, but that's part of what makes it interesting. You know what I mean, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, like I said with Clipse, you know, sometimes it's fun to, you know, it's like a little time capsule. You know,
Yeah.
the same rap and R&B is fantastic for that. You know, you can listen to Tribe talk about beepers and pagers and whatnot in 2019. It's fun. You know, it's like a nice little thing.
And, you know, we've talked about before how like time will erase these problems eventually, you know, because like when we're 20 years from now, you won't be like, oh, it sounds like early 2000s. You'll be like, oh, cool, it sounds like the early 2000s.
Exactly,
you know,
yeah, nostalgia builds up or whatnot, yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I did listen to this record in the lead up, but like, Gabe, the thing that I kind of was thrown off by is like, I feel like there was so much reliance on love-hate. Like, I can't remember if it's Walking on the Moon or the first track, Rockin' That Shit, but I keep hearing like falsetto and like
right.
You know what I mean, like it just keeps like the callbacks to
he
like,
loves
shoddy
it.
is the shit just is very prevalent on the at least on the first part of the record anyway.
I mean, I think it's so fun. He loves to he quotes himself. It's like he's so proud of his past, you know, songs that
his one record before,
he constantly quotes them, and it's like he's just, you know, it's like a song will like completely change. I mean, the songs are often quite long and like overstuffed, maximalist in the best way possible, and then it'll just for like a few bars switch so that he can remind you that he wrote Umbrella, you know, and then it's going back. Like he doesn't want you to forget that he wrote like basically the song of the year or whatever year that came out. I think that's very charming. Another thing I wanted to mention is, you know, talking about we're not quite at poptimism yet. I was really amazed to see that Pitchfork didn't even review this album, and it didn't make their year-end list.
That's weird.
I'm sure they would call it a masterpiece now. And by the following year, 2010, this, you know, fits my theory that 2010 is the year that poptimism took over. They BNM'd his third album that came out that year. So that's how fast things can change. Like, you guys remember when Pitchfork wouldn't even review pop artists?
Right? Oh yeah, for sure.
So I really believe that this is where it switched, and also I believe that I was ahead of the curve. In we all were listening to Leroux and stuff. We were ahead of Pitchfork, honestly. Okay, number 2, Dan. What is your number 2?
Yeah, my number 2, Vic Chesnutt, At the Cut. Vic Chesnutt, he was a singer-songwriter from Athens, Georgia. He was paralyzed in a car accident at the age of 18, and he could only play like very simple guitar chords because his hands were like partially paralyzed. And this is his penultimate album. It was released just a couple months before he died in a self-inflicted overdose, suicide. And the backing band on this record is Silver Mount Zion, one of my favorite bands, and some guy from Fugazi, who I don't care about. But it's just filled with these like acoustic songs, but with Silver Mount Zion, doing the old Godspeed Screwdriver and whatnot behind him, and it's just very haunting, especially when you know the story that he's singing about suicide a lot on this record, and then when he actually commits suicide just a couple months later, it's just like a really dark, really haunting record. I absolutely I love Vic Chesnutt, and this is maybe my favorite record of his. It's just an all-around great record, and the reason Elephant Six moved to Athens, Georgia, is because of Vic Chesnutt. So,
wow,
we could thank him.
This is this is also not something really on my radar, though I've heard his name and sort of knew his story. I had no idea that Silver Mount Zion was teaming up with him in any capacity. That makes me really
they did two records with him.
Wow, makes me really interested to check that out.
Elf Power did one with him as well.
I don't suppose, Darren, that uplifting story makes you interested in checking this one out.
No, not exactly. I mean, I like a good story, so yeah. I will give it that. I am kind of curious to check into it. Dan, do you think that I'd find anything interesting on this record?
You honestly, you might. You like Elliott Smith, right?
Oh yeah.
It doesn't sound exactly like Elliott Smith or anything, but it's got a similar-ish vibe. I think if you can appreciate Elliott Smith, you could appreciate old Vic Chesnutt.
So it's like
you said he committed suicide.
He overdosed. He overdosed on
Christmas
relaxers.
Day.
Yes,
on Christmas Day.
I think it was.
Christmas Day, he did it. 2009.
He couldn't afford his medical bills, and so he killed himself.
Oh, that's extra sad. Wow.
Way to bring the podcast down.
Yeah, this puts a little dent in my theory that music was more fun and happy.
Yeah, for real.
I'm gonna have to work on
They weren't playing this at the club.
No, they sure weren't. Okay, well, your number 2, Darren.
My number 2 was St. Vincent's Actor.
Okay. Interesting.
I knew you'd have that on there somewhere.
Well, yes. We reviewed, I think, her most recent record, right, on Metaphoric.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
I recall saying quite a bit that how I missed the old St. Vincent, and this was the record. I'm actually glad it came out in 2009 so I could actually talk about it a little bit. This was the record I was talking about. This was the first record that I had ever heard from St. Vincent, and I was sort of like immediately enamored just by kind of how strange it is, you know what I mean? So she's got this sort of, obviously like pop vocalist sound, which she exploits a lot more on her most recent record, but she's like playing guitar a lot on this record. And, like there's still like a very indie rock approach to it, and she ends up or never mind. I don't know what I was about to say, but yeah, just on this record in general, like it's not full of like synths and super Katy Perry pop or anything like that. Like it's just straight like indie rock. Like she just seemed very charming. I was very excited to see what would come from after this record, but I was just disappointed. So unfortunately, this is the only record I can rely on.
Are you serious? You don't like the next one?
No.
Strange Mercy?
Wasn't a big fan of that one.
Wow.
Weird, yeah.
I never have listened to this album ever, and it wasn't until Strange Mercy that I discovered her and really, really loved it, but for some reason didn't feel compelled to go back to this one, even though it did get a lot of acclaim, and I remember that. It does sort of bring up an interesting part of music in 2009, which is something I've never really been in touch with. Maybe you a little bit more, Darren, but you know that like it's like that female indie singer-songwriter thing that was like big at that time? I don't know, like Regina Spektor or who's that person you made us listen to on that one like Guilty Pleasures thing we did on our previous podcast?
Oh God, yeah, what was that? That was awful.
Jenny Lewis or something like that?
Was it? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually how it came across to me. Like somebody was just like, "Hey, you got to check out this one track from this, artist or whatever." And of course, me, it's like if I like the track, I've got to listen to the whole album. It's just kind of how it works. But it was exactly that. Like people just, I think like the playlist era was just starting to like kind of come about where people would just latch onto one song at a time and different artists and stuff like that. And St. Vincent was like totally in that wave,
Yeah. I think I had an iPod by this time, some iPod Mini or Nano or some shit like that. But it does seem to me, without having ever listened to this, it does seem to me like she comes out of that world, which never appealed to me very much, but then does a whole hell of a lot more with it than your typical Regina Spektor or whatever. So I wonder if this album would be an interesting look into the crossroads that like indie singer-songwriters were at in 2009, because that previous model was just not going to last much longer. You know what I mean, Dan?
Yeah, I agree. And St. Vincent really, I think, I'm not a huge fan of her. I'm just not really super into like indie rock, but I think she is like one of the better examples of all that. This record's not bad. I prefer the next one. But I'm not a huge fan of any of her stuff, but it's decent enough.
All right. Well, number 2 for me is, I cannot believe we have no crossover yet.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
I don't expect anybody to have this on their list either. Arctic Monkeys Humbug. Anybody?
No,
Anybody?
Nope. I absolutely hate Arctic Monkeys. Yeah.
Do you have hatred in your heart for the Arctic Monkeys, Darren?
I mean, I don't, but I have tried to listen to them, especially like when you were like going crazy about them.
Love them.
Yeah, I remember that.
I just could not get in. Yeah, could not get into them. Sorry.
Wow, I've basically loved them from the start, and this one is fascinating because it's kind of like this lost classic. They team up. They've kind of made this like really angular. It's like based on sort of that post-Strokes wave, that's going on. Speaking of Julian Casablancas, especially in the UK in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and then here they suddenly make this strange turn where they team up with Josh Homme. That's also a word I learned how to say today. The guy from Queens of the Stone Age. He's producing, and they just like transform from this like weird, tight, angular complexity thing to this sprawled out Sabbath style desert stoner rock kind of a vibe. There's something like so dark and menacing about it, but I would describe it more as like vicious than, like heavy or metal or anything like that. It's just, we talked about Scott Walker last week, and I know this isn't anything like Scott Walker, but it's like these smart ass kind of teenagers making like modern day Britpop just transform into something else completely. And I loved those early records a whole lot, but this was the one where I'm like, they're just establishing themselves as like one of the most interesting bands out right now. And I think, in my opinion, that kind of continues to this day. They don't exactly follow this path that Humbug sets, but they really have like explored a lot of interesting things throughout their, late career. And it's interesting, talking about the Strokes and Julian Casablancas, like this is pretty much the only band that has managed to sort of reinvent themselves, forge something new, stay relevant all the way until today. Would you guys agree with that at least?
Yeah, I will give you that. Of these like indie rock and, that garage rock revival thing, they are like the sort of only one that's still around, and not just around, doing shit that nobody cares about. Right. I remember when that last Arctic Monkeys record came out, and people were excited for it. So yeah, I will at least give them that.
Darren, you gonna give him a little props for that at least?
Yep, I would. I'm inclined to agree there. I can't. I'm not going to argue.
I think it's interesting. We were just talking about like St. Vincent and everything, and like this, because in 2009 is kind of a fascinating year. The more I think about it, we'll get to this in a minute, but it's like a big change year because the garage rock stuff that had dominated like the last decade was basically dead. It died like in 2009, as far as I'm concerned, and it's interesting that St. Vincent was able to sort of maneuver her way out of that earlier sound, and Arctic Monkeys did the same thing. But now we're on to our number one. Stan, what is your number one album of 2009?
Yeah, I'm sure this will be the time, we've all got cross, I'm sure we're all in agreement here. My number one, Sun, Monoliths, and Dimensions.
Wow. You had a real edgy list, I gotta say. Really,
I do.
Really deep cuts here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I absolutely love Sun. They're one of my favorite bands, and this is maybe, depending on my mood, this is maybe their best record. Of course, you know what you're getting into with a Sun record. It sounds like your refrigerator running a little too loud, and but here it's 4 tracks. One side of vinyl for each track, which sort of becomes their formula. I love it. It's just, I love this like sonic bath that they create. It's just something to get lost into. There's for something so like sort of simplistic on the surface. There's like so much to actually dive into and just. I love to like listen to this record like late at night with good headphones on, as loud as you can get it. They always say maximum volume yields maximum results, and just you can just like you can hear each individual amplifier. You can hear. It's sort of like amplifier worship, amplifier wankery or whatever. Right. But I love that, and it's just like a sort of like a little mini world to get lost into, as all their records are. And this is kind of the first record I think where they sort of like really kind of bring in synths and vocalists that are Black One and White 1 and 2. They have sort of like metal singers and all, but like the second track here, mega or big church, some word that's like 90 characters long. There's like a choir sort of piping up and everything. It's just they have a sound and they stick to it. You know what you're getting, but within that they vary. Yeah. And I think that this is sort of maybe their best work, and if you're gonna get into Sun, I think that this is the best entry point. And I don't think there's been a year or probably many months that have gone by since 2009 that I haven't listened to this record.
Wow, it's funny to think back because when Black One came out, which was 2005, this was like, at least to me, this was like their breakout. I mean, this is the first one I think that Pitchfork, like BNM'd, and it was like a big deal. And I thought it was like the funniest thing I had ever heard. Like, I just thought it was such a joke.
No, I remember you and one of our other friends would frequently make fun of it.
Because we would play it and we'd be like, is there anything more ridiculous? And I'm like reading that he, recorded like these vocals in a coffin and stuff. And it's like... I thought it was just the funniest thing. And then by the time, and I really just wrote it off. And then when this one came out, I gave it a listen and I was kind of like, wait, this is serious. Like, this is kind of terrifying and kind of amazing. And what if it's not a joke? It pretty much converted me. And, I'm not like the hugest fan because I do kind of think you always know what you're getting. But I do love what you said about how there's really a lot of room for sort of, play with texture and stuff within the Sun sound, and just nobody does it like them. I'm guessing this is probably your number one as well, Darren.
Oh, yeah. How did you know?
Doesn't sound appealing to you?
Not at all. Not even a little bit. Maybe one day. Maybe Dan will find a way to to get this onto the podcast, I'm sure. So.
I love how it's just like, we've been talking about like, what were the trends of 2009? Like Dan was having a very different year to us. But okay, what was your number one, Darren?
Well, I couldn't pick any other record. It's Animal Collective.
Okay.
Yep. And we obviously talked ad nauseum about this record recently.
We did.
I don't think there's much else to say.
But would you say that, like, because when we did that podcast, you were down on it before we decided to revisit it. Time,
right.
you felt time had not been kind to it. So if before we did that podcast, I asked you what was the best album in 2009, do you think you still would have thought it was probably going to end up being Merriweather?
Yeah, I think so, because like I mentioned earlier, I would have gone into Last FM and I would have seen, I listened to this record more than any other record of 2009. Let me check it out. That rediscovery would have led me to think, oh yeah, this album is actually a lot better than I seem to remember.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we don't have a whole lot to add. I'm surprised, Dan, that it didn't make your list.
I really thought hard about it. But I did. I honestly did. I wanted to make a list of like what today in 2009 I think are the best records, and just especially after doing that whole episode on Merriweather, it's just not a record that I ever like organically feel like putting on. Yes. I just never. It doesn't have that like staying power. When I hear it, it's good. I still enjoy it. And of course we talked about this already, but I never, and I still don't have like a desire to ever put it on. And that that just isn't going to make a list.
I feel basically the same way. It's like when we did that episode, and by the way, you should check it out if you want to hear very detailed thoughts from all of us on Merriweather Post Pavilion. I listened to it so much and just sort of rediscovered and like sort of fell in love with it. I do appreciate it a lot. But then just the thought these past 2 weeks of listening to it again after all that was like so repulsive to me.
It's like when you've eaten a bunch of cake and someone's like, would you like some candy? And you're like, normally I love candy, but no.
Yeah. And I really want to, it's not my number one. I really want to state though, for the record, that I'm not just being edgy. Like I think it would be like number 6 or 7 for me or something.
I completely agree.
Yeah. But really it's like, it's a little much. My number one is the Flaming Lips Embryonic. We didn't have a single overlap in any of our lists.
That's crazy. I'm really shocked, honestly.
Truly can't believe that happened. But Embryonic, absolutely stunning record. It's a double album. And the Flaming Lips, they basically abandon their sunny pop, style for like absolutely crushing existential darkness. I got to say, it sounds like, Darren, have you listened to this album?
I have, because in 2009, I always hated the Flaming Lips, still do. And you would force me to listen to this record. You constantly were like, no, it's good. It's good. Trust me. And I hate it still.
All week I've been thinking, like if I just could play this to Dan, he would.
You've
like
done
it.
You've done it.
I already did it, I guess. But it's basically like rooted in, it's like Miles Davis's electric period. It's got like the same,
which
textures.
I do love.
Yeah, it's amazing that they make this fit their sound. But it sounds like it's being concocted in like the spaceship from 2001: Space Odyssey or something. It's like kind of like dystopian sounding. It's largely bass driven with like a really strong krautrock and kind of post-punk vibes, especially like the really moody Joy Division stuff. And I love how like there's this blown speaker kind of vibe to it. Like everything is in the red and the record is loud as fuck. But it's completely integral to the sound. And a lot of times like things like amp buzzes and just like electronic kind of glitching is part of like the rhythm or the melody or something of the track. And it's a classic double album where like these weird half ideas are everywhere that you can explore. The more, there are songs that are very long and just like really spread out. And, that shit is just right up my alley. And it's an even better version. We were talking about like Grizzly Bear zigging when everybody else is zagging, this is like the supreme example, because the Flaming Lips, in my opinion, they almost helped invent like this kind of warm, fun indie-tronica thing that was really peaking at this time, like with Yoshimi especially. And then it's like time for them to like just basically sit on their throne as the godfathers of the most popular sound, on the planet at this time. And instead they just like pull this crazy shit. They put out like the darkest, I mean, it's truly, and the lyrics, sometimes people cringe about like Flaming Lips lyrics. I would disagree, but they're like brutally dark. Another thing, well, Darren, do you like this album at all?
I really couldn't get into it. So, in 2009, again, checking the Last FM records, I was busy listening to a lot of Yoshimi, just tons and tons of that. I mean, if this was a 2002 list, we would be talking about this album. I would be, at least. Also, Self Bulletin. I was listening to old Flaming Lips. I did not listen to this record in 2009, and so I did listen to it in the lead up to this, and just I liked it. I feel like though it is like it's too big of an album to just dedicate just 2 weeks to and feel like confident about putting it on a list like this. But I could understand why. I mean, I could get into it, in other words, is what I'm trying to say.
I just think it's like such a cool and brave
It's definitely different.
Yeah, I mean, it's different, and I think it totally holds up, and there's like just a lot to explore here. It doesn't sound like 2009 because it's almost like rebelling against 2009 in a weird way. I did want to mention another, I did some historical research here, some archival research. Kidding a little bit, but here's something you might not have known. Record Store Day began in 2008, and in my opinion, Record Store Day basically ruined the Flaming Lips, because
they're like, they are the kings of collector garbage.
They're obsessed with like, it's like a song with Kesha and Miley Cyrus like on a Ruby Starfruit like vinyl or something, or like
a 24-hour song in a skull. In
a real human skull. Yeah, I actually couldn't come up with a more crazier. I couldn't exaggerate one.
No, exactly.
Beyond that, they. You know what I mean? Like, it's like the Flaming Lips were basically like one of the greatest indie bands until Record Store Day existed.
I think that is one of the reasons I hate the Flaming Lips. I hate Record Store Day. I've been collecting records since I was, much younger than that, and they just, they are part of the reason that like all this collector garbage started happening, and why records cost so goddamn much money now.
They spearheaded the Record Store Day.
I can't stand it.
Okay,
they're like the Kiss of indie rock, just like they're more about merch than anything else.
Well, now they are, but they had a good run. They had a fucking fantastic run.
I'm sure Kiss did too.
Okay, let's, I want to talk about the big picture now, zoom out a little bit, but first, let's just recap our list. Dan, 5-1, what did you have?
Yeah, Black Moth Super Rainbow, Eating Us. 4 was Clipse, Till the Casket Drops. Fever Ray, self-titled. Vic Chestnut, At the Cut at number 2, and number 1 was Sun, Monoliths, and Dimensions.
And Darren?
Number 5 was Leroux with Leroux. Number 4, Discovery, LP. Number 3, Julian Casablancas, Phrases for the Young. Number 2, St. Vincent, Actor. And number 1, Animal Collective, Merryweather Post Pavilion.
And I had number 5, The Field, Yesterday and Today. Number 4, Grizzly Bear, Vekidamist. There we go. Number 3, The Dream, Love vs. Money. Number 2, Arctic Monkeys, Humbug. And number 1, Flaming Lips, Embryonic. So, any honorable mentions? Just missed your list by a hair. We already talked about Animal Collective's Merryweather Post Pavilion, but any other honorable mentions for you guys?
Yeah, I had Gucci Mane's The State versus Radric Davis. I really struggled as to what would be.
Dear God.
Nah, fuck both of y'all. I honestly really went back and forth between what would be number 5, and just the problem with State versus Radric Davis, as with a lot of rap albums, especially in this time period, too many skits, and then just a little too long. There it could have used some editing, but it does feature Lemonade, which is probably Gucci's biggest hit and one of the greatest rap songs of all time. And if it's not on your banger playlist, don't invite me to your party.
Kind of interesting that because trap is going to emerge, and it's like kind of underground still at this time. I mean, I know there's some hits.
Honestly,
stuff,
Lemonade is sort of like the first big hit. Yeah,
it's on the verge of like taking over hip hop, and we still live in the trap era. I personally think it's about time to
thanks to
see
Gucci.
Something else. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, that is sort of another momentous thing. I'm surprised, Dan, in continuing to talk about honorable mentions. This was definitely one for me. Might have been my number 6, honestly. Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links too.
That's a record that, everybody loves so much, and I just think it doesn't come anywhere close to Cuban Links 1. In fact, I listened to this record a ton this week just because I felt like I was missing something. But it just really, it seems sort of disjointed, and it's like a good post career, not career, but like the post, main
golden age.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Of like Raekwon and stuff. Like it's perfectly good, but I don't know. I feel like the Cuban Links name makes people kind of give it a little more credit than it deserves.
Maybe it does strike me as like I listen to it a lot. As well, and I think it's actually really good. I think people were just like so relieved that it was actually good that they thought it was. They gave it great.
A little, exactly. That's exactly how I feel about it. It's good, but it's not fantastic.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of that vibe of like it's almost like recreating the classic RZA sound from the '90s, except with like digital technologies now or something, and then it's like all of a sudden there will be like a Dr. Dre beat, and it's like very slick, and you're like, why is this here?
Exactly.
But the rapping is like strong as fuck, I gotta say, the whole time. What about you, Darren? Any I got a couple more, but any honorable mentions for you?
I do actually have some very close to being on my list, but K-pop actually had an interesting year in 2009. Yes. It saw the release of a couple of interesting records. To Anyone, which is arguably the greatest of K-pop girl bands, debuts this year with their aptly titled first mini album.
Great, creative.
Yes, G-Dragon has his first solo record, and Girls' Generation releases the single called G, which ended up being like a massive YouTube video hit.
Big breakthrough moment.
Yeah, and I would say that, really 2010 is where K-pop really started to rise on the international scene, and then kind of peaked around 2012, I would say. But yeah, this year was important for K-pop, and it needed to be mentioned. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'll pass.
Yeah.
I did have another honorable mention though. Tim Hecker's An Imaginary Country. It's it's sort of one of his second tier kind of records, but I don't think he could record anything bad. That was another one I sort of struggled to fit into the list.
Yeah. Got a little off topic, but I was just reading the Reddit Let's Talk Music or whatever it's called. There was a very cute, very adorable post by somebody who was like asking about ambient music.
Oh, I read that. I read that today at work.
Like, I never liked ambient music. I thought it was just like, pleasant background stuff. But then I listened to a Tim Hecker record, and it made me feel, like very unsettled. I didn't know.
Hot me, do it again.
I didn't know ambient music could do that. Like, it was very, like, wow, the whole world has been opened up.
You just want to pat them on the head.
A couple other honorable mentions really almost made my list. Mew, the album is called like No More Stories. It's actually like an entire like stanza of poetry, the album, but No More Stories for short. Really love that one. Real Estate, their self-titled album, came out that year.
Oh, that is good.
Some of their next album I really like a whole lot more, but this is really a great gem, I would describe it as. Basically, in looking at all of our lists here, it's kind of interesting because in my opinion, it's like Dan is kind of going like, I don't know, a full underground sort of, as far as the narratives of 2009 that I was constructing in my head. Darren is more like in the, what I imagine 2009 to sound like. And then I was kind of like somehow impressed in returning to the albums that, not all of them, but seemed to kind of like turn away from what was happening at the time. Like, some of these like Arctic Monkeys and these, Grizzly Bear and Flaming Lips and stuff. So how do you guys think about like just this year in general? I mean, I wouldn't call these honorable mentions, but there was a lot of other big stuff going on this year, particularly like Lady Gaga's Fame Monster. This was another one for me where I was like, because that Bad Romance song, I was like, pop is just as good as anything else. Like there's stuff on the radio that is just as good. Like why isn't Pitchfork reviewing it? I mean, do you guys agree with the narratives I'm building here? Like, this is like indie and pop are meeting, poptimism is happening. You know what I mean?
No, I 100% agree, especially Lady Gaga. I think that really was like sort of a bridge between the two things, because she started, like that, remember they were like released that EP and then they like re-released it once like the song hit with like a couple more tracks or whatever. And it seems like she was sort of the first like pop artist like that Pitchfork started paying attention to. We started getting like articles about her.
Yeah,
and
it's true.
Just sort of general chatter, and even on like Mew and stuff, people started like taking notice of her. Whereas like, something like Katy Perry or, whatever, Britney Spears, something like nobody would have like it would have been on anybody's radar. We wouldn't know anything other than maybe like the song that you heard on the radio. But, Lady Gaga and that EP in particular, I feel like was the first time a lot of people kind of, woke up and said, pop music it has credibility and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that it really came to fruition for me when we were at one of those, I can't remember, is it the Orpheum Club, which was like sort of like an indie club, right?
Yeah.
You'd hear songs like 1901 from Phoenix, right? And then you'd also hear Bad Romance in that same place. You weren't hearing Katy Perry or the Britney Spears, but you did hear Lady Gaga.
Exactly.
That same place was bumping Kanye the next year when Dark Fantasy came out. So like that was really where I felt like, okay, this is happening. Like it really is entering, like indie, pop, and electronica are all kind of like colliding here.
I know. I mean, I just had like a real sense of that at the time, but I felt like even Pitchfork was like behind us a little bit, because I remember feeling like sort of outraged that they weren't covering stuff like this. And then they would eventually switch, in my opinion, when Kanye made it okay to like mainstream music the following year with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. But I was like digging back through stuff, and I don't know if you remember like Shakira She-Wolf, that single. I was just like, for some reason I really liked that song, and it's like kind of a Leroux style like indie-tronica song that Shakira is doing, of all people, and so like that's like sort of the old guard, the old Britney Spears era of pop, like updating for the new sound, so I still think that's a good song. I don't think any of the rest of the record is very good, but it's like, I was really convinced that there were gems to find in pop, and so that's what's like what I was weighing on me this whole week is like what happened, because now I really resent Pitchfork's poptimism, like full-blown poptimism. Is it that pop music was better back then and like genuinely more exciting? Was it that indie and pop were closer together at that time? Was it that we're just being hipsters and now that it's cool, we don't like it? I mean, what is going on?
No, I think the thing is like Pitchfork back then, they didn't go full into it. You'd get a story about Lady Gaga. They talked about Kanye and all, but you didn't hear every little thing from all these people that aren't worth hearing about. Like they've taken to talking about the Katy Perrys of the world and the Britney Spearses and stuff. Yeah. Whereas like before, they sort of like that was muted, and if there was a good pop artist you needed to know about, like they'd tell you about that one. Whereas now it's just too much. They've gone too into the deep end of it.
Yeah, it was almost like an inversion, because it'd be like, oh, indie is really established. We all love it. Here's a pop song that you should also enjoy. Like we know that stuff's good. You might not realize that here's like a gem of a pop song that is also good. Whereas now it's like every major label pop thing is supposed to be like the best thing ever. You kind of on board with this, Darren? Do you have a better explanation?
No, yeah. I mean, I just think that they hesitated to their own detriment to not like jump on this when it was happening. You know what I mean? And I don't know why, but certainly when we get to like 2010, they start really pushing like Robin. They really get behind Robin.
Yeah.
In a major way, and I think like they get behind Lord too, right? A little bit.
Yeah,
later
well, that's
on.
a little later.
this is once they're kind of already embracing most of that stuff. But I don't know if there was just like a worry that the overall readership would get turned off, because I mean Lady Gaga, before Bad Romance still had like, she was like a popular artist, you know what I mean? It's not as if she was just being discovered with Bad Romance. So, I could understand maybe the hesitation there.
And I mean,
and to look, go ahead.
At the time, I'm looking at their top 100 songs list of 2009. Paparazzi got number 83. Like if that happened today, Paparazzi would probably be in the top 10, at least the top 15. Drake, Best I Ever Had, that's 86. Can you imagine Drake only getting 86 in today's Pitchfork? It just wouldn't happen.
Can we talk about Drake? We gotta, right? Because this is the year, and I thought it would be on your list, Darren, but So Far Gone, his breakthrough mixtape comes out. Did you consider putting it on your list?
I did. I came back to it and listened to it a few times. I would probably have put it amongst my honorable mentions, but I had to talk about K-pop, so...
Okay.
And you guys talked enough about like hip hop and stuff. So
yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because when you listen to So Far Gone, you're listening to the new sound. I mean, same thing with Gucci Mane, I guess, but you are basically hearing the dominant sound for the next decade in its like emerging form. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, I do kind of think that like music was really fun and happy in 2009, kind of overall, and Drake's gonna take that shit like dark and sad, like we're gonna be crying in the club, for the next 10 years, and it's like it's really just incredible to. I mean, I think the record's like a little long. I was interested to remember that. How do you say that person's name? Like Lee or Likey Lee, or what I'm talking about?
Like Lee, yeah.
Like Lee. So he samples that little bit song on there, and it's pretty fascinating that there's another like great example of indie and pop like colliding, which will be totally, by the following year, The Weeknd is like sampling like Cocteau Twins and shit like that. I mean, it's like, it's totally on the verge of happening, but maybe the most important record of this year is Drake's So Far Gone, because it really shows the path ahead. You know what I mean?
Right. And he, just continues right on into the next year with like, his what is it, the major label debut?
Thank Me Later,
yeah.
Thank Me Now, or whatever.
Yeah, which I recall loving quite a bit. I probably would have to revisit it, but I remember listening to that quite a bit. Now, So Far Gone, I definitely listened to a lot back in 2009, but I don't know. When I came back to it and listened to it, I just didn't feel like all that attached to it. I know. It definitely had like the mixtape vibe to it, and I guess obviously, in hindsight now, listening to it, it's like, well, this is just old Drake. Like he improves on this.
He definitely does
immensely. So,
but doesn't it still feels like momentous that it came out in
for
2009?
Sure? Oh,
to me,
yeah. Best I ever had. Yeah, I mean, come on.
It just symbolizes like that year in a nutshell. It's like, here's where we were and here's where we're going. You with me on this, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Drake fan, and I haven't listened to that record in years and years. But yeah, I mean, definitely.
I just remember like I have never experienced this before really, but it was like one of these memories where I'm realizing that like pop can be just as amazing as like the indie music that I love and the classic rock music, the 60s music that I love. I'm like at this party and that Best I Ever Had song comes on, the first time I've ever heard it, and I did remember hearing somebody mentioned as a joke that the guy from Degrassi was trying to rap. So then somebody said it was Drake, and I was like, that's the dude from Degrassi? This is actually a really good song. And then at that party, like somebody just decided to play that song on repeat for like, I swear, an entire hour, and nobody was upset. Everybody was completely happy because we all couldn't believe like what a great song it was. And I mean, I just like, I didn't know how high, the heights he would reach, but like just at that moment, I was like, this is a big deal. And in fact, it really defined the sound for the next decade. I find that fascinating. Yeah. Other stuff, any other stuff that you guys were like had fun remembering? You mentioned 1901, Phoenix, Listomania. Those were huge fucking songs that year. We heard those at the club every time. And
Oh yeah.
Passion Pit, I really enjoyed rediscovering. That Sleepyhead song is an absolute slapper of an Indie-tronica song. But when it comes to like Phoenix, you guys, at the time I thought that they were like too mainstream. Did you guys have a similar kind of vibe there?
Yeah, I've never liked Phoenix.
But you'll start jumping around, right? If Listomania starts playing, you're like,
yeah. I mean, when I was at the club, if it play, fine. But I'm not going to listen to it at home.
What did you think, Darren? Were you a fan at the time?
Yeah, I don't know. I was a big fan at the time. Really loved that song 1901. Like I would get like really hyped up on that song, but I just didn't take them seriously beyond that,
Yeah.
And even revisiting that record, Wolfgang Amadeus Phoenix, pretty much right after Listomania 1901, I'm like, okay, that was nice.
I kind of feel
ready
that
to
way
move
too.
on. You know what I mean? So
yeah. God, it's almost like, because like we said, I think this is like sort of peak Indie-tronica. It's like the sound that like, actually it's interesting because I think MGMT maybe like 2 years earlier, 1 year earlier, kind of broke through with that sound. I'm sure you guys all remember the MGMT breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
And MGMT actually does some guest work on Embryonic by the Flaming Lips. They're like thrashing out and going crazy. And then of course by 2010, they'll also do their own, about face and make congratulations, which is really weird and totally abandoning like their hitmaker status. So I always thought of like Phoenix as like MGMT light, although now I will allow myself to admit that they're, these are actually like really great singles. Other stuff, you remember Owl City Fireflies? This is basically just like
oh god,
a Postal Service ripoff song, but huge hit and like just a completely Indie-tronica song,
Yeah, that's a song I'd like to never hear again.
It does kind of suck. I listened to it again this week. Let's see what else. Other stuff I wanted to fly through. Kid Cudi, Man on the Moon, comes out that year. That was really big record. I never really liked it, although I do love that song Make Her Say, especially Kanye's verse. What is it, like Born in 88? How old is that? Old enough. Fantastic. What were you going to mention, Dan?
Surfer Blood starts up.
Okay.
Which, speaking of Record Store Day, remember they played Record Store Day.
They did
at the record store we go to, and we might have saw them, and we'll say what we did in a tiny little place. Also, Jay-Z had the Blueprint 3 with Empire State of Mind, which has my favorite line ever: "Where dreams are made of." Which makes no sense.
I find that so strange.
Where dreams are made of.
Any other fun memories for you, Darren?
No, I think that we've pretty much covered it. You didn't mention Lily Allen.
Lily Allen, love, absolute love.
Yep, her record "It's Not Me, It's You" came out in 2009. Had some really fun songs on there.
That was another pop album that blew my mind.
Yeah, that was definitely. She was a lot of fun.
Darker days when we got the Black Eyed Peas, I Got a Feeling, and Boom Boom Pow that year.
Oh, yeah.
Kesha's
Boom, Boom, Pow.
TikTok.
Oh, my. Okay, I do remember hearing that.
Pitchfork is trying to, make us care about Kesha nowadays, and it does sound like she's going through shit, but her music sucks. The Lonely Island, I'm on a Boat. I'd rather forget about all of that shit. Hey, this one's actually good. Asher Roth, I Love College.
Oh shit, I forgot all about that guy.
Fuck with that song.
I can't remember who it was, but I went to some concert and he was one of the openers, and I got there late and I missed him, and I wanted to hear that college song so bad.
Wow, is he the original Mac Miller, or is Mac Miller before him? I wonder. I
think it's Asher. Yeah.
I really liked both around that same time, but yeah, Asher Roth feels like the blueprint of early Mac Miller. Miley Cyrus, Party in the USA. That song I still actually like. Irresistibly catchy. And here's something you guys might not have remembered. Big event from 2009, not directly related to 2009, but we got, at long last, the Beatles remasters that year. And if you guys are anything like me, you probably spent about 6 months of 2009 just listening to the Beatles.
My last FM was covered in Beatles. Now I know why. I was like,
there you
what
go.
was I doing listening to the White Album so much that year? Jesus.
Yeah, I went out and bought those and, on CD like an idiot. And then a couple months later, they released the mono box set, which is much better. And I just had to torrent that one. 2009, Dan couldn't afford it.
Yeah, you really needed both. But yeah, so that was momentous.
You didn't mention Weezer, Weezer had a record that
Raditude. I spent some time. I spent some time listening to Raditude. I surely did. Hey, there's some indie crossover going on with Lil Wayne, Can't Stop Partying.
Oh, that's right. The real
that's where indie really broke into the mainstream. That's where they truly collided.
Well, also we're forgetting the biggest cultural event of all of 2009. Kanye interrupts Taylor Swift at the VMAs.
Is that right? That's 2009.
2009.
Oh, yeah.
And that leads us to one of the greatest albums of all time, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
That's true. Wow.
That's right.
Wow.
What a moment.
What a year. I mean, to wrap up, I really do believe that this is like, it's a weak year. I think we all kind of agree with that. It's not, it's not super strong.
It's a transition year.
It's a transition year, and it's almost like completely fascinating for that reason, because it's like you can just look at music this year and see where music was and now where it's going. And I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's like, like sides of the same coin, where it's like you got Drake on one side and then like Phoenix on the other. Like that's what was big before. Now this is what's going to be big next, and it's all just swirling around here together. I mean, weak year, but like really fascinating and kind of fun time,
Yeah, I mean, that's why I would describe it as a transition year rather than a weak year, which is something like, in 2009, I probably would have said it was a weak year. But, looking back, and that's something interesting, I'd like to do that with some other years that seemed bad at the time. Because, once you can see the trends and everything, it makes more sense, and it's really interesting to look back at.
Yeah, I think that it'll be real interesting when we get around to talking about like 2010, which I think we all agree is at least a monumental year.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I hope in that conversation we kind of reflect on like the year before and the year after 2010, because it's just such a huge year, and I feel like it set so many trends in motion. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that we have a little bit of a plan to over the course of the year. I guess whenever we can't think of anything, to do top 5 of, 99, 89, 79, 69. Weirdly, I suspect that, maybe we could talk about that later. I don't understand how it's possible, but each one of those feels like it's going to be a year in transition, because it always feels like right on time, music changes like in time for the decade.
That's right.
So that means we're probably in a transitional year right now, but I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of other interesting crossroads in the future.
Yeah, well, that's enough for this week. And a little disclaimer: if we didn't mention, whatever your favorite record is or whatever, we didn't like it. But you can go ahead and you can email us.
It's not because we didn't know it. It's not because we missed it. I just want everybody to know that.
We don't miss anything. But if you want to complain or whatever, go ahead. You can email us, popshieldpod@gmail.com. In all seriousness, we would like to hear your thoughts. Our next episode is going to be in 2 weeks. We'll be talking about Beyonce's Homecoming and the future of live albums in general. So if you like the show, help us out. Subscribe, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts, and stay connected. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of that is at PopShieldPod. And we'll see ya in 2 weeks.
See ya.
So long.